Good evening, good morning. Welcome to week 6 of PSSL 6240 here at George Washington University. I just want to start off with a couple of announcements. Adobe Connect session last Thursday I think went pretty well. A good briefing came out of it. I think everyone who's there definitely got something from it. I know I did. And I think it was a good time for anyone who had questions. Next Adobe Connect session is not this Thursday, but the following Thursday. And again, Group 3 is in the chute, doing a presentation on the Boston Marathon intelligence failures and all the issues with customs and immigration and the lack of information pushed down to the lowest level. So they'll be going that week. And then the other thing I will do at the Adobe Connect session, as I mentioned earlier, is a job talk. Talk about careers in the federal government, careers in the national security realm, and trying to get on into the intelligence community, those types of questions. So if you have more questions, please let me know ahead of time so I can give an answer during that session as well. I did notice one of the things about security clearances and local law enforcement, I would be curious to see if anybody has actually been on the receiving end of that, whether local law enforcement getting more security clearances. And the reason I bring that up, and it's very relevant to week 6, is one of the failures, the intel failures you'll see, is the fact that the federal government was aware, due to having sensitive intelligence, of their various plots, but that information was never disseminated down to the police departments, the local law enforcement. There were supposed to be programs to prevent that, DHS fusion centers, so people had clearances and this information could be shared readily. I don't know if that in practice that's actually happening. So something, again, if there's issues, please, or if anyone could get me an answer to that, I would appreciate that, or anyone had any perspectives on that. So review of week 5, I think we went pretty well on this. A couple of things, counter strategy, U.S. And again, people commented on the Obama administration and what went wrong since before 9/11 and since, or after 9/11. I just want to clarify a couple of pieces. I think I mentioned the Philippines being a good model for how the U.S. should do security assistance, where it's low U.S. footprint, heavy intelligence support, heavy civil, military, and civil affairs support, and to actually solve the problem at a level that's far, far cheaper than what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Great model for the Philippines, doesn't always work. Yemen would be an example where we had the same type of template where we provided security assistance to the regime there. We tried to give them intelligence so they can defeat Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And as was brought up in the Adobe Connect session, success is not exactly forthcoming. And again, the larger instabilities in Yemen would prevent something like a security assistance mission from being successful. So just keep in mind, again, in the lecture I said the Philippines was a great test case, a great example, but that doesn't always work everywhere. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. EU counterterrorism strategy, and a great paper would be, if you wanted to send it, is what went wrong in Paris. Or is something like Paris likely to happen in the United States? And there's, you can go multiple ways on why EU counterterrorism strategy would not be effective while U.S. counterterrorism strategy would be if you're facing something like a Paris incident. I'll let you decide that, but I think that'd be a fascinating paper or fascinating topic to explore. And then the Israeli comparisons, I think is key. The two things to take away from that is in Israel, their counterterrorism is more pushed down to the lowest level. I talked about earlier how it's not really like that in the United States, but in Israel, it's definitely more of a federal, regional, local, better synchronicity between those levels than you would see in the United States. Again, just from a comparison perspective. And the second, and I think more important thing, is that Israel has far more resiliency than the United States. And I'll point to the Boston Marathon incident. We closed down Boston for a week or so because of what happened in Boston. And Israel, after there's a suicide bombing that kills people, the markets open the next day. There is a far more level of resiliency among the population than in the United States. So those, again, just kind of takeaways from the Israeli experience that you saw in the Gora lecture and my lecture as well. So again, keep those points forward. As we move forward, one of the potential paper topics you can go with is U.S. counterterrorism strategy, and what is our strategy going to be from 2016 on. In fact, I've had a student of mine write as if he was working for a presidential campaign, and you can choose whatever presidential candidate you want, but you are now writing his or her counterterrorism strategy from here on forward. That would be a good paper to write on. Other things you can write about are our visa program. Now I'll give some leeway on what you can write for the third paper, but you can write about our visa program. And for those of you who followed what happened in San Bernardino, there was a lot of issues that came up with, okay, who can enter our country? What type of scrutiny are they given? And again, this came out of San Bernardino, and that would be a great paper to write. Here's what's screwed up. Here's your recommendations to fix it. So those are, again, some topics that you can write about if you choose to write about U.S. counterterrorism policy. So preview of week 6. Week 6 is documentary week. A lot of great documentaries out that are family friendly. In fact, they're very educational. Me and my wife have watched a couple of them, and she's not in the counterterrorism space, so they're entertaining, or at least informative for a broad audience. So first, I would recommend just reading that one chapter that I've assigned in the 9/11 report, just the recommendations. So that's the first thing I would recommend reading. Then I would read or watch National Geographic 9/11 documentary. There's 2 discs. Just read or just watch disc 1, and that will give you all the intel failures that led up to 9/11. And as you're watching it, just think from a perspective of law enforcement or Homeland Security. Where were the pivot points that you could have stopped a 9/11 attack? So think about that while you're watching that documentary. And again, the documentary is out there on YouTube. Nova Inside NSA documentary. Again, that is on YouTube as well. Great documentary. Provides information to the audience that was not available in the 9/11 Commission. It also, in my opinion, and again, watch the documentary, but all the information that Snowden revealed back in 2013 was highlighted in this documentary when it was produced in 2009. If someone has a different perspective on that, let me know. But I think this documentary revealed a lot of that inside information. So again, keep that in mind while you're watching it. The Fort Hood report, the Congressional Task Force report on Fort Hood. Read the pages assigned, but don't read it enough so you understand the intelligence failure related to Fort Hood. How we didn't, or how the law enforcement community and the defense, criminal investigative service community, how they couldn't put together that Nidal Hassan was indeed a radicalized threat. There's disparate information in those two communities or across the communities, and they didn't put that together. So again, don't read every word of that report or every word I sign. Just make sure you understand the gist of what happened, the investigation, what happened, and where the investigation went awry. And then finally, the BBC documentary on the underwear bomber. Great documentary, underwear bomber, Christmas Day bomber, however you want to call it. And most of you probably remember that in 2009. The documentary goes into what happened on Christmas, the Christmas Day bomber, but more importantly, how come we couldn't connect the proverbial dots where we had information that he was a derogatory individual, yet he was still able to board a U.S. flight and conduct his attack with relative impunity. So, again, lots of documentaries to watch. A little bit less reading, more on the documentary side. And if there's any questions or issues, feel free again to contact me.